It's my nerd world. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and this is a self-publishing podcast. All right, so on the show this week, I'm going to continue with a little bit more detail into the book writing creative process and where I'm at right now when it comes to editing the third book in the opening trilogy of my EMBARK series. Also, the other books that I'm working on and trying to juggle that along with the full-time job in the middle of a pandemic. Plus, we have a lot of listener feedback this week, and thank you so much for writing in. Let's go ahead and make it official, and welcome to the show.
My Nerd World.
So I don't know if I mentioned this last week. Welcome to My Nerd World, a self-publishing podcast. I am your host, Jon Justice. But the music you hear in the background, if you haven't listened to the audiobook, this is actually the opening music for the audiobook. And I'm kind of surprised nobody had asked me about where I got it from yet. So either way, I'll tell you. I went to, and I don't have it up right now, so my apologies. But what I did was I actually went to a website that offers up free audio effects, right, sound effects, and also musical cues. And these are just individuals who went and posted up on the website things that they created, whether it's, pieces of, sound effects or, music that they created. And some individuals require you to say, hey, just give me credit. Other people just go and offer it for free. So I spent about an hour a couple years back when I was in the middle of doing the audiobook and I wanted to have some type of theme for my EMBARK series for the audiobook. And as I mentioned last week on the show, I had at one point intended to do a fully produced version of the book, and it was just going to be too much work to get that done. So I just went with just a regular straight read. And I'll talk a little bit about that because somebody actually has a question and a comment about the audiobook when we get to the listener feedback portion of the show. But this was just done by an individual that says Graham Makes, and it was Arctic Orchestral Cue. And I heard it, and I like the epic feel of it. Again, I write these stories from the vantage point of, or from the angle of what I would want to see on a movie screen. And it makes it a little bit complicated because I know that with Melinda, my wife, who has been doing the editorial edits of the book, we kind of struggled with the first book quite a bit, from sort of figuring out the happy medium between what she would call stage direction and then narration. And that's, something that continues throughout all the books, right? The style of my writing. How much do you give the reader versus how much do you allow them to fill in the blanks? I don't think that much about it when I'm writing. I, write very, I guess like everybody does, but I take it from a sort of inspirational standpoint. And I'll use the radio show as an example, or even the Star Wars or Depeche Mode podcast that I do. I talk about the things that are the most interesting to me, right? I don't pick stories for the radio show on Twin Cities News Talk that I do Monday through Friday. I don't pick stories just because, okay, that's a big deal. We should talk about that. I pick a story because it's interesting to me, because that's going to provide the most interesting perspective to the individual listening. If you're reading something or talking about an issue or a story that you don't really care about, that's going to carry through in how you do your show. And I conduct my writing in a very similar fashion. I'm writing things that I genuinely want to see on the big screen, and then I go into detail over things that I genuinely care about. If you've read the first two books, if you've read EMBARK Book 1 and Treasure in Darkness, you may or may not have noticed. I think a couple of people have and have mentioned it, but I get into a lot of really minute detail, almost to a Tom Clancy-esque level in my in my fake science, right? Kind of science fantasy. I try to root it in a reality that makes it acceptable, even though a lot of the stuff hasn't been invented, and I'm taking a lot of liberties, like, anti-gravity lift manifolds and things like that. But in the first book, I really went down a rabbit hole on many occasions of getting into specific detail, especially when it comes to the ships, what they were equipped with, the names and stuff like that. And I know for a lot of people that got wonky, but that's really what I wanted to do. I mean, this was my first time writing a story. These were the parts of stories that I'd read or I'd seen in a movie that I really get into, and so I wanted to put that to paper. But as I kind of grew through that first book of writing a 120,000 word novel, as I got into Treasure in Darkness, which was a much more difficult story to write. I wrestled with that story quite a bit as being the middle chapter. I love the way it turned out in the end, and I actually think that struggling that I went through in writing Treasure in Darkness really lent itself to some amazing moments in that book. The Vanishing War, which I'm currently in the process of editing, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute, was more kind of a combination of the two. I knew where I was going in The Vanishing War. I didn't know exactly how I was going to resolve everything, and then in the middle of writing, in the first, third of the book, I kind of was struck by, what if I did this? And what if I capitalized on this thing that's kind of been sitting here in the background of these stories, the first two stories, and then I actually used that as a catalyst to close out this trilogy. And it ended up working out really, really well. But if you read Treasure in Darkness, obviously after EMBARK, you'll see that I kind of stepped back away a bit from the overly technical side of things, but then ended up gravitating towards world building. Severin, who's a friend of the show and has sent an email in this week as well, really picked up on that, and I talked about it on last week's show. I wanted a vibrancy in the world building that I was doing. Mars has already got kind of a really cool aesthetic if you take what we've seen in films, and especially a movie like The Martian, which was a really big inspiration for when I thought about the scenes that take place on Mars, with D-Corp on Mars. But then I really wanted Zima to be colorful and vibrant and to have this kind of combination of Blade Runner, lived-in world, and this sort of alien version of the Wild West. And a part of that was something that I really like that I included in the story was I decided I love when you see like stained glass, and not stained glass as in portraits or pictures, but just when you see, and I'm trying to think of a good example. I guess there's a movie example I can give. If you've seen X-Men Days of Future Past, in the beginning of that film where it takes place in the future in that movie, because you go back in time in that movie, at the beginning part of it with the X-Men in this future location, like in this almost fortress up in the mountains, they're in this environment that has these glass patterns in the background embedded into the walls of all these different colors, and I really, really like that. So I ended up including this idea that, humanity now has to go and rebuild. They have this technology, but the technology is really based around flight. And so you have a bit of an infrastructure taking place of giant ships that are now serving as buildings and infrastructure, but at the same time, you'd want the residents there to obviously start building on their own. And so I kind of created this environment of gray dirt and took the normal looking tree and I made them more of like a vibrant orange, so that any of the woodworking that would be done would have this nice sort of orange sheen to it. And then I decided, what would be cool if the ground really lent itself to doing that old style stained glass. And so I ended up including that into the book. And so I'm kind of off from where I started in all of this particular line of thinking. But again, Melinda and I would struggle with quite a bit this idea of how much do we open up to the reader and how much do you leave to the reader's imagination. And I really feel like with Treasure in Darkness, there was a better balance of, let's provide a lot of detail when it comes to the environment and world building, but we'll step back a little bit from the technological standpoint and not get too wonky on the tech side of things. I still do, but certainly not to the extent that I did in the first book. And because of that, it ended up becoming a smaller book, a tighter book. The Vanishing War is going to end up being longer than Treasure in Darkness, but not quite as long. I think I'm at 110,000 words right now on that one. But it's the big sort of epic finale, so it's gonna be larger. But I really feel like The Vanishing War is a really good, not only finish to the opening trilogy that wraps the story up, while also kind of like EMBARK did, leaving the world, leaving storylines that we can kind of grab onto and go off in other books, and leaving it open for further stories down the line. But if somebody stopped at The Vanishing War, you would have a nice complete trilogy. And that book is really a good mashup of what I did with EMBARK Book 1 and what I did with Treasure in Darkness as well. All right, so where I'm at right now in the process is we're currently... Melinda is still editing the last third of The Vanishing War. I had hoped to have it done by now and off to the proofreader, but because of this stupid pandemic and the boys being home, she's now playing principal around the house, which is totally fine. I'm under no pressure to get the book out, apart from the fact that I would really like to get it out for people before the end of the month, because people stuck at home maybe want something to read, and the Treasure in Darkness came out October last year. Is that when it came out? So it hasn't been too long since that book came out, but I know that there's a lot of individuals who have just now been finishing both books, and I really want to be able to hand them, okay, here's the, while you're sitting at home reading and doing other stuff, here's the final book in this trilogy. So I reached out to my proofreader, Angela Wallace, who thankfully is doing fine, who's located in Southern California, and I'm going to be sending off to her what we have done of The Vanishing War to begin the proofreading process to kind of speed all of this up. I had intended to sit down and read the whole book again before I send it off to Angela. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to do kind of something different with that. The reason why is I read really slow. And with the full-time job and keeping my sanity and the boys being home, I just, if I were to go and read it, we would probably just end up sending the whole book to Angela when we were done, because it would probably take me the amount of time it's going to take Melinda to edit the rest of the book. So what I'm going to do is over the course of the next day and a half, I'm basically just going to kind of skim through it. There's certain sections that I know I want to take a look at again, and then I'll ship it off to her, what we have done, and she'll do the proofread, and usually that takes her just a couple of weeks. And then as soon as Melinda finishes the last third of the book, then we'll send that over. And this same thing actually happened on Treasure in Darkness. So I think Angela, my proofreader, was actually kind of expecting that this was going to take place, because she kind of was like, "Yeah, go ahead, just like last time. Send me what you got." So in the middle of this, in the middle of finishing up The Vanishing War, and while Melinda was editing, last time I had taken a break from writing, and just for a little bit, and then got into writing the third book. This time I didn't. So as I mentioned on last week's show, the fourth book in the series, which will be a spin-off book, written in first person. So it'll still be an EMBARK book, but I'm going to put it under the banner of an EMBARK adventure. I don't want to do the title right now, but it'll be, blank, 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 an EMBARK adventure. So it certainly will come after The Vanishing War and fit in and really nicely with that book, but it's not going to be directly about what happens in The Vanishing War apart from a particular character's individual story. I get the feeling, based off how that book has turned out, that it has the potential to actually end up being more popular than the original three. I don't know. There's been something really unique that happens in the middle of this writing process, and it's like when I finished, let me put it this way. So when I finished EMBARK, the big question mark was, did I pull it off? My wife had gone and edited it. I'd had it proofread. I had some beta readers read it. Everybody seemed to enjoy it, but I'm a brand new author, and everybody talks about how your first book sucks. And so my biggest question was, did I pull it off? And I feel like I pulled it off with that first book. I'm a novice writer, so my writing isn't the greatest, but I'm learning. When I got to Treasure in Darkness, it was more difficult. This was a middle chapter. I wanted to do something different. I no longer had the luxury of having things based on Earth anymore. I had to be out. I'm now out with these characters out in the universe. And so because of that, I'm going to have to get, like I mentioned, a lot more detailed into the world building and create some new threats in all this. And all of this has to lead into a third book to close out this trilogy. And so that second book was a lot more difficult. And because of that, when I finished it, I really liked it. But I had a big, I had a big concern because I wasn't sure if it was going to work because it's a different story. I think ultimately it's good that it's a different story. I didn't want it to be a repeat of EMBARK. I wanted it to be The Empire Strikes Back or A Last Jedi, something that felt like the other book, but it had to be a different type of story. And so I was really nervous when I sent that off to beta readers, and ultimately I've been pleased with the response that I've gotten off that book. I really feel like it works really well. So when writing The Vanishing War, and I did start reading it, a couple of chapters already, and I'm really excited about The Vanishing War. I do feel like I've got something special with this book. And I have a lot more confidence behind The Vanishing War than I did with the other two. When it comes to the spin-off story, that one I've just got a feeling about. And I could be completely wrong, and I won't know until I get it done and I get into the hands of readers to find out. But I really feel like that particular spin-off story has the potential to be something unique and special. And I'm excited to find out whether or not that's true. As long as people enjoy it, that's great. But I just have this feeling. The way that in writing in first person, having moved off of the third person omniscient from the first three books, and then doing this from first person for whatever reason has kind of, I think, broadened my ability as a writer by singularly focusing on this one individual and the plight they're going through. And the fact that this is a story about a person that has a sidekick that I won't get into, but a person that's essentially alone and having to go through difficulty after difficulty after difficulty. In the middle of this pandemic, there's just something about the real world that is affecting my writing in this spinoff story, and also putting me in a position where I ended up injecting a lot of humor into it because I need to laugh. So, back to my initial point. I'm going to send off the Vanishing War to have the first part of it proofread. I'm just about finished with this second story. I've actually kind of shoved it aside for a few days. I'm down to the last act and was struggling a bit because the book's really short right now. I need to get it to about 60,000 words, and I'm just now approaching about 40. I'm going to wrap up this last section. I came up with a couple of cool ideas of what I can do that I'd like, that I think will work really well with the story, that'll add some length to it. I don't want to be in a position where I feel like I'm adding just to add to get the word count, and I want it to work. And thankfully, because of that challenge, I've been able to come up with, if this happens, that I'd really like to see, and this will give us an opportunity to kind of expand the book further and kick it up a notch. And it's a little bit unexpected based off of what happens through the majority of the first part of the book. So I'm really looking forward to getting back and finishing that off. I've already started on book 5. So there'll be another trilogy, book 5, 6, and 7, which will be essentially more of a direct extension to the first 3 books 1, 2, and 3. And really the best way to sort of describe all this is, think of like Rogue One or Solo as it relates to the other Star Wars movies, right? You don't have to watch either of those movies within the context of the other films. You can watch them all in order, but if you just want to pop Solo in, it's its own story all by itself, even though it fits into the timeline. The spin-off book is probably a little bit more relatable to Rogue One, because I'm kind of doing something Rogue One at the end of the book that will tie directly into... It was supposed to be a prologue for book 5, and I decided, nope, not going to make it a prologue. I'm going to put this at the end of this spin-off story to set up for the next 3 saga books. That'll be 5, 6, and 7. I'm really excited for these stories, for these next series of stories, too. And all of this is a really good distraction from this pandemic. I love going in and doing the show with my partners, with Drew and with Sam every day, but make no mistake, these are not fun times right now to be talking about news, and we do the best that we can. So being able to get the creative juices flowing and create more stories has been just an absolute blessing for me right now. And I came up with a concept for these next 3 books that I think is going to work really well. They will always, of course, feel like EMBARK stories, but they will not be like the other stories that came before it. The challenges that our protagonists are going to be facing against these new threats is going to be very, very different, and the resolutions will be very different as well. So in terms of timeline, I don't know yet. I really like to get a couple more books out next year. So the plan is right now to have The Vanishing War out sometime this month in April. And I'll talk a little bit about the audiobook here in a second. And then I almost said the name, the spinoff story, the side story. I should have out April, May, June, July, probably fall. I think I'm going to aim for fall. I have a book cover session scheduled with Tom Edwards for the 4th book, for the spinoff book, in May. So that's going to work out really well because for the last book, or for The Vanishing War and for Treasure in Darkness, I actually had the covers done before I was done finishing the book. I've had the cover done for The Vanishing War now for quite a long time. But I really liked that because the artwork that Tom Edwards made was a nice visual to have out in front of me in the middle of crafting the story. It ended up adding this nice little added element to the creative process, seeing sort of a visual representation of the last act of the film. So if you have any further questions, and we're going to get to listener feedback here in just a moment, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or of course you can leave a comment on YouTube if you're listening to this on YouTube. And there's I don't know what I meant. Maybe I mentioned it on this show or I didn't. I'm having a bit of an issue when it comes to the feeds on my podcast. So this particular show is being posted in 2 different places right now. The My Nerd World, a self-publishing podcast, has its own dedicated feed, but for whatever reason, it's not funneling to iTunes the way that I want it to. So it's only been available through Spreaker. So that's why, for many of you who listen to the Star Wars podcast, you are getting the self-publishing podcast on that feed too. It won't always be that way. And I'll make sure to let everybody know. As soon as I can get that fixed on Spreaker, it'll be on its own feed on iTunes, and you'll have to subscribe to it on its own feed on iTunes. And this was something that I struggled with a little bit because I liked the idea of having all my shows out on one feed, but at the same time, I don't know. I know that I don't particularly care, but I know for some people, if you're getting inundated with a bunch of podcasts on a particular feed that you don't want to listen to, it's kind of a turnoff. So if you're listening to my Star Wars podcast and you just want to listen to that, and then suddenly my Depeche Mode one pops up, you're going to be like, I don't want to listen to a Depeche Mode podcast. I don't even like that band. Who's Depeche Mode? So that's why the Depeche Mode podcast has its own dedicated feed now. So, but for now, I'll be posting it in both places until I get that worked out. So you'll be getting this, and you're probably actually listening to it. If you're not listening to it on YouTube, you're probably listening to it on the regular My Nerd World Star Wars feed. And again, I'll let everybody know when that switchover ends up taking place. Everything is slowed down right now. It's unbelievable. I've been trying to push out a couple different locations for the podcast, and it's taken like a week for them to approve. It's just this stupid pandemic has just slowed it's just awful. I can't wait for it to end, and I really do pray that for those that maybe just read the books or are thinking about reading the books, first off, thank you for the support. But at the same time, I really do pray that my books can be a good distraction for individuals. If you're listening to this and you haven't read the stories yet, if you like science fiction and you want the world ending in a different way, then you definitely want to go and pick up EMBARK.
My Nerd World.
All right, let's get into some listener feedback this week. And first, we'll talk to Carl Warpy, who says this: I bought both audiobook 1 and 2. I love the whole few friends getting together aspect. Reminds me of Luke and his friends at Tashi Station in the deleted scene of episode 4. Although I'm not one for space battles, I do like the overall story, and I got to admit, the last words of book 2 choked me up. Yes, that makes me happy. That really took me by surprise. Good job. The only slightly negative thing, and I don't even take this as a negative, and I'll explain, about the audiobook, with no disrespect to your good self, sir, is the lack of voice character, i.e. I would love to hear R.C. Bray or Mark Thompson do their stuff with your books. Yeah, and like I mentioned on last week's show, I don't take offense to that at all. I decided to voice these first 3 books for a purely sort of promotional standpoint, figuring that, all right, well, I have a decent enough voice. I'm an okay storyteller on the air, and, I do know these characters, so perhaps I can get more attention and sell more audiobooks because of the fact that I'm also a radio show host, and I've been in, several different markets, that people will want to go and listen to the audiobooks and perhaps look past the fact that I'm not the best audiobook narrator in the world, because you're familiar with my voice. I'll tell a quick story not relating to self-publishing, but it kind of relates. So for those that listen to my full-time radio show, it's Justice and Drew. Drew is my friend. He does the show with me. He actually hired me. He was the program director in Tucson, Arizona back in 2007, and I was living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so he hired me to do the morning show there. He was my program director and producer. And then after 3 years, he ended up coming here to Minneapolis and then producing a show up here, and then eventually ended up getting on the air on that show. And then there ended up becoming an opening, and I really wanted to do the show with Drew, and he was now a talk show host where he hadn't been before. And so I came up here, and I've been doing the show here with him for 4 years now. But when he hired me in Tucson, it was kind of a last-minute deal. I didn't have any... I'd been a rock radio DJ, alternative and active and classic rock radio DJ for the first part of my career, first like 9 years. And I didn't have a lot of talk experience. And so when he needed somebody to fill in, 3 different hosts hadn't worked out, but they tried to hire, and he didn't have a lot of faith in me. And he, asked if I wanted to audition. I knew that doing the audition and he wanted me to do it from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was like, well, I'm not the greatest talk show host yet. So, doing it over an ISDN line from Michigan to Tucson, Arizona, I kind of got a 50-50 shot. But if I go out there to Tucson and I meet everybody face to face and do it live, maybe I can close the gap of the lack of experience that I have by being there and letting them get to know me. So I flew myself out to Tucson to audition and did 3 shows, and that was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and by Thursday they had offered me the job. Okay, so I kind of had the same idea when it came to narrating the audiobook. So I don't take offense at all. I narrated the audiobooks because I figured I could probably sell more audiobooks because of the people that know me from radio, and they would be more forgiving over my lack of narration skills because they are already used to my voice otherwise. I don't know what I'm going to do in the future. Like I said on last week's show, the audiobook part of this takes a lot of work, and I probably won't have the audiobook for The Vanishing War out for at least another month after, probably not until June, because I haven't gotten started on it yet. I've really been focusing on getting the ebook and the paperback out for that. So I'll begin the recording process for that soon, so you have to do all the recording process, and then I have to go back through all of it, and I have to edit all of it, and it just takes a long time. And then it takes like 2 weeks for Audible to go and approve it. So, in the future, though, if I end up being more successful, if I end up selling enough books where I'm making enough money, I may move towards having somebody go and narrate these books, and at some point down the line, I may actually end up going and hiring somebody to do the existing books. But again, it's all going to be about how much money it ends up costing me. So I'm going to do my best bet. I'm going to do my best work that I can for The Vanishing War. I'm stuck on one little thing, and I'm kicking around the idea because some people have offered of having somebody voice one particular character, because I decided to make him Irish, and I made him very Irish, and I really like the idea of this character having an Irish accent in the story, but I can't do an Irish accent. So I know there are some people that have offered to go ahead and voice that because they can. So I'm considering doing that, or I may just try to teach myself an Irish accent. That's how that works out. All right. JOB writes this. Thank you for answering my questions. I think your way of creating names is a great idea. Yeah, you're welcome, JOB. And for those that missed it last week, I basically create names by looking at words that are all around me and dropping letters and creating names out of those words. Like, here's a good one. Like, I'm looking at April right now, and I'm like, ooh, Prill. I actually like the name Prill quite a bit, so I may use that later on. I just now came up with that. And I also think the thought, and I think somebody mentions it here. As a matter of fact, they do. So let's go to Gen G. Thank you, JOB, and Gen G writes in, another friend of the show, as are all you guys. John, I'm not a writer, nor do I intend to be, but I had to listen to this just to see how the whole process happened for you. I absolutely love how you get your character names. Genius, and your reason for doing it that way, also brilliant. And again, the other reason for doing it the way that I do it is because I'm like, well, maybe there's some familiarity with that particular name because, like Prill, it's just missing the A, but you don't automatically think that. Because I haven't had anybody come back and figure out how I did it. I mean, nobody's come back and say, I know how you got those names, right? Although it drives my wife Melinda nuts because she's like, why didn't you just give them regular names? I mean, they came from Earth. I'm like, yeah, I know, but what fun is that? I'd rather give them Star Wars type names. You know, we're 100 or so, 200 years in the future. I haven't really established that, so it just, it seems relevant to me that people would have different names than John, Jill, Jack. I guess they wouldn't all have J names, would they? Tom, Dick, or Harry. All right, back to Gen G's comment. I think I'm going to go back and get the paperback copy of your book, as I already have the audio versions. I'd like to have the paperback because there's just something about it. Continued success. And as a matter of fact, she did, because I have an email for my Star Wars podcast for this week's show. And Gen G writes, I did go and order the paperback of EMBARK, so cha-ching for you. So thanks, I appreciate that. By the way, I don't know if did I mention this last week? If I did, I apologize for repeating myself. But, let me grab it. So, somebody sent a copy of a book. I don't have it in front of me. We get books at the radio station all the time. And the book had this dinosaur on it. It wasn't about dinosaurs. It was about, like, the economy and social networking and all that. But it was a color. It had like a color of a dinosaur on it. But the finish was matte. It wasn't glossy. And I just loved it. So I went into Amazon lets you pick what kind of I have Treasure in Darkness in my hand right now. I love the cover. Ooh, I got to talk about that. I forgot. I'll do that when I get past the listener feedback. But I did glossy versions for the first two books, and I like the way they turned it. They look great. They're really shiny. But I was like, man, I wonder how the matte would look. So I've changed it on Amazon right now, and I got the matte. I think I did talk about this last week. I got the matte versions, and I really like the matte versions. What I'm going to do is, when the Vanishing War comes out, I'm going to switch it back to glossy for anybody who's already purchased the books. Because I don't want, it would bum me out if I got the first two books and then the third one I got the cover was matte and not glossy. It won't match up. And then once I get past the overall promotion of the Vanishing War after its release, I'm going to switch them all back and sell and make them all the matte version, because I just think it looks a lot better. It's still just as colorful, but it just has a nice booky feel to it. I feel like it feels a little bit more professional. So before I get to Severin's email, she's got a lot of questions in here. The cover for Treasure in Darkness, if you're familiar with it, it's got Taft and Catha on the cover, and then it's got both their ships. It's got the landscape of what Zima would be, kind of where they're at. And then it has the three members of the triad on their hover drifts on the cover. To Tom Edwards' credit, the cover designer, the artist, I had an idea for the cover. He created the hover drifts, made them look exactly like I wanted them to look, which was awesome. I love the idea of space bikes. I just thought that was cool. Actually had a friend of mine email me on something different and asked me, and was mentioning the space motorcycles, and was like, I was trying to think if anybody else had thought of that. The only thing I could come up with was the Jetsons. But I liked the idea of, for as ridiculous as it is to think about somebody riding on something in the middle of space, I just thought the concept was cool. But the original idea I had for Treasure in Darkness was everything was the same with Taft and Catha, the ships, and the landscape. But the three triad were going to be coming right at you on the page, on the cover. They were going to be facing right at you, right? And then they were heading right for Taft and Catha. And Tom was such a trooper because he did the artwork and he sent it to me and I got it and I went, oh, that doesn't look good at all. It just didn't. You couldn't really tell, and he'd done such a great job with the way that the hover drifts were shaped. And so then kind of on a whim, I'm like, well, what if we pitch them sideways like they're flying by, and we had the jet cross over the spine, some of the jet wash out of the back of the thruster sort of cross over the spine into the back. And so he threw that together, and it was just like, oh, that looks awesome. So that was almost a happy mistake based off of what my original design was. So I was really pleased with how it came out. And I'm looking at the Vanishing War cover right now. It's actually on my it's my desktop picture, and I love the way that the reddish orange of Mars looks with the space battle going on and the inclusion of the triad on there. I just think he just did a fantastic job. All right, one more email. Severin writes this. Hi, John. I'm stalking both your podcasts now. Thank you. I don't mind that kind of stalking. I'm really enjoying the self-publishing one. Thanks for the shout-out and explanation of Katha's love of churches. It makes perfect sense if I think about it, and probably would have come to the same conclusion myself if I had spent as much time with her band as I have been with Depeche Mode. Nice. Question. I've had the vague plan of someday writing a YA-friendly fantasy novel myself, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. Still, I keep knocking it around my head for when I have the time and the maturity from life experience to craft a story actually worth reading. Let me stop right there. I'm not taking issue with it, but I just want to maybe offer a word of encouragement. The maturity and life experience to craft a story actually worth reading. I don't think you need that. If you watch movies, right, and you read books, you're getting life experience, even though you're getting life experience from other people, right? There's a lot of life experience in the in the books that I write. I'll never tell, but exactly what those are. But there's a lot of me in those books. I think some people that know me the best will probably see that. But there's a lot of little things in there that I put into the book with life experience. But there's also things that I drew from other places as well. So, if you write a story that you like, right? If this is a tale that you want to tell, then I would argue that it's a story worth reading. I just wanted to throw that out there, right? Because I don't think from the maturity level and the life experience level is as necessary as maybe you wrote there. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying. I read that and I went, I don't think, just do it. Just start. I'll say this much. If you start doing it now while you're not in any hurry, because that's what I did with EMBARK. I just started writing to see if I could. I didn't put any grand plan together. It was only after I finished the book and realized how much I enjoyed the process and what I had created that I went, oh man, I kind of want to keep doing this. This is a lot of fun. But when I wrote that first book, it took me let me put it this way. It took me 3-4 years from the first idea until I got it done and finished. And then I got the second book done in less than a year. And the third book's going to be done in shorter time than that. And I've written the fourth in a matter of months. So you kind of see where the trend line is going there. One of the things I've always wondered about is what word processor app or software does one use when starting to write a book? Microsoft Word, something from Google Suite. Now that almost all computer programs for drafting essays, papers, and large writing projects have switched to being cloud-based, it must be kind of nice knowing your work is automatically backed up to the cloud instead of constantly worried about hitting the Command S and saving your work, and doing additional backups to external hard drives. Do you have a preference between cloud-based softwares, assuming it's one of the ones you use? Okay, so answer to your question. I started out, if you're on Mac, I'm looking at it right now. So Notes, it's just Notes, the little white pad that has the yellow tab up top. I wrote EMBARK all in Notes. Now the funny part about this is, and this is actually still causing me problems, is I had my notes backed up to the cloud. So everything that goes into Notes gets backed up to the cloud. I didn't realize this, but every time I went in to work on EMBARK, every time I stopped and walked away, it sent a version to the cloud. So one day, out of nowhere, I'm getting towards the end of finishing the book, and I get this alert from Google saying that my memory is all used up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not, why is my email memory all turned out? And then I opened it up, and I can't even tell you how many thousands of pages there were that were all just starts and stops of when I was writing EMBARK. And it was like, thank the good Lord Almighty for like the delete all function. Because it took me, I don't know, I must have spent like 45 minutes to an hour sitting there, delete, and just going through page by page and trying to delete all. There was that many in there. So I didn't do that the second time around. So the second time around, what I did was I'm writing in the Mac Word program Pages, and I have it connected to my desktop. So writing in there's all kinds of Scribner. I know there are all kinds of fancy schmancy writing programs out there, and maybe I'm being pinkies up and dumb by not going out there and embracing them, but I just haven't gone and done that yet. Writing in Pages is nice because I can format it the way that I want. It allows for commenting. You can highlight a certain section and then you can comment. So it's on my desktop. It's on Melinda's desktop on her laptop. So I'll go in, like this morning. I got up this morning, 2:30, got done with my prep for the show, and then I went in, because I go to bed so early, I went in, and Melinda had like 8 comments from the part of the book that she'd edited last night. So I would go in there and look at her comments. What is she suggesting? This isn't working. Can we change this? What is the eye color of Akshay Rao? This kind of thing. I'll go in, I'll make the changes, I'll leave a comment back, I'll explain why I did this or whatever, and then I'll save it, I'll close it out, and then when she goes back to edit, she can go in and see my comments and we move forward. So that's how I do it right now. And it's worked out great for me. And so when I send off the copy of the Vanishing War, I'll send it off to Angela to do the proofread. And then what she'll do is she'll send it back and do exactly the same thing that Melinda and I did. She'll go through the entire book. She'll make all her corrections, but they will all be suggestions. So I'll have to go through one by one and accept every single one of her suggestions that she did, right? And it works out really well. On EMBARK, it was a long process because that book was still riddled with a lot of errors on the proofread. And as a matter of fact, I need to, at some point down the line, go back again because there's still a couple of spots where some things are screwed up. Not a lot. I think there's like maybe 4 or 5 still errors in that book. The Vanishing War was a lot better. It was a shorter book. Melinda and I had both done a much better job at editing it. And as I mentioned on last week's show, when I wrote EMBARK, that was a complete and utter disaster. I was just hammering out the keyboard. I mean, it was gibberish. I have it. One day if I ever become a famous writer and these books get turned into movies, I'll go out and I'll have a chuckle doing an interview with somebody, and I'll bring out the original first version of EMBARK and just look at it, and you can see just what an absolute disaster that thing. It's pretty much illegible. I kind of had to rewrite the whole thing when I did the line-by-line edit on that first book. All right, Severin goes on to say, also, did you have to include your earnings from book sales and taxes as a home business? I've been curious about how to tackle the not fun side of being self-employed. Like, how not to make the IRS mad? Does making money off writing books even count as a home business or being self-employed? Okay, so I'll do the short version of this, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more at length about this next week. So, on the first, because of when EMBARK came out, so it's 2018 and 2019. So I didn't do anything on the first round on EMBARK with taxes because it didn't fall into the tax year. Thankfully, EMBARK Book 1 and then Treasure in Darkness both ended up falling into the same tax year because of the overlap. So what I did on my taxes this year was I had a revenue stream that came in from Audible. I had a revenue stream that came in from Amazon, so that included the Kindle Unlimited reads, and then also all the ebook sales and the paperback sales for both the books. Okay, so Amazon and Audible make it really, really easy to go and compile that data to pool how much money you made. So I did that so I could see the cumulative total of how much money I made from both books. And then what I did was I went back and I grabbed all the expenses that were associated with the book. So the proofreading on both books, the cover art on both books, and then the advertising that I did on Amazon, on Amazon ads. I've also run ads on BookBub. I used one separate service one time. They did a book promotion. I also ran ads on Facebook. So I pulled those up. So these were all write-offs. So these were all expenses that I could write off against, on my taxes. And then I also included with that, and I know you didn't ask, but included with that was the revenue that I ended up making off of the podcast that I do. So Spreaker pays me money based off the number of downloads that I get, and then the views on YouTube I get money too, although it's not been a ton. You know, you got to get a lot of. You can make a lot of money on YouTube and on podcasts, but you know, you got to have a lot of downloads, and I do fine, but I'm not making a fortune by any stretch. And then I had some also advertising. I'm sorry, not advertising, but endorsements that I had for the Star Wars podcast, from AdvertiseCast. So, yeah, I didn't declare it as an extra business. It was all just additional income. At some point in time, if the writing ends up becoming as successful as I hope that it will be, I'll definitely look at perhaps creating an LLC. But so far this year, it turned out well. And I wasn't upside down, so I did make a little bit of money at the end of the day. But the focus that I had on these first couple of books was, I'm not out to make a ton of money. I want to build an audience separate from my radio audience for my books, because that's how you're going to be successful. I can't do it off of people that know me off radio alone. And so, you know, you got to put in money, and with any business, you're going to lose money before you make money, because you got to put money into it. Thankfully, I did make a little bit of money. But again, if you just looked at the money that I made off the book sales, it wasn't bad at all, right? It's a nice little chunk of change. Not enough to retire on by any stretch of the imagination, but a nice little bonus, right? But with all the money that I spent on advertising, it was almost completely offset. But thankfully, I didn't end up being upside down, and I ended up making a little bit of money off that. So, and a lot of this comes down to, and again, I'll spend some time on this on other podcasts, but a lot of it really does come down to learning how to use the AMS ads correctly, and then volume, getting getting more books out there to get more people to buy books. That's the hard part. A brand new author with one book, that's really difficult. I had, thankfully, a built-in audience of people that knew me from radio that would buy my book mostly just because they knew who I was. And then you do the second book. So with the second book, hasn't sold as well as the first book, but that doesn't surprise me, because I know a lot of people bought EMBARK just because they knew me, Jon Justice, not because they were big science fiction fans. So I kind of look at Treasure in Darkness as more of, okay, this is more representative of new individuals that don't know me, right, from radio, and people that know me from radio but also like science fiction and liked the first book. And so what I've been told from other podcasts on numerous occasions is that, yeah, when you get your third book out and you actually have a series, then you're really going to see how well those stories are, how much people like them. Because now people can go, oh, this person has written a trilogy of books, and I can grab these, and I'll have all 3 books that I can finish. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine just tweeted, the world is hoping that Jon Justice will release his EMBARK 3 book for sale early to save us from quarantine boredom. So that ended up working out well, which is exactly why I want to get those books finished. All right, that wraps up the show this week. And I meant to go like a half hour, and I went 50 minutes. I don't know how that happens. All right, so before I close it out, let me go ahead and do my EMBARK Book 1 and EMBARK Treasure in Darkness and promo for The Vanishing War, which comes out here in hopefully the next 3 weeks or so. If you're just listening to the show for the first time and you're wondering, John, what in the Sam heck are your stories about? Well, here's my little ad for EMBARK Book 1. For Earth, the end is near. Only a reluctant hero and the girl he loves have the power to save humanity's future. It's the not-so-distant future, and car culture is replaced by air and space flight, made possible by 2 of Earth's largest corporations. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his 3 best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Kate Amaro. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful and ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. When Taft, Catha, and their friends uncover a shocking secret, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time on Earth is running out, but with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they'll fight for humanity's future and survival among the stars.
My Nerd World.
And that officially wraps up the show for this week. Thank you so much for checking it out. And please, if you want to support the show, no Patreon, but go buy my books. Amazon.com, look for EMBARK, and then Jon, Jon Justice. The ebook, the paperback, and the audiobook are all available now. And perfect timing while you're in the middle of quarantine. And I promise you that the third book will be out this month before the end of these 30 days. Pray that this whole thing is at least moving towards being over in terms of this pandemic by then. But if you're looking for something to read and you want some fun, family-friendly science fiction, if you got kids that are stuck at home and you're like, well, I got a 12 and 13-year-old, but no, they are completely kid-friendly. Anybody who's read them will tell you that. Again, from 11, 12, up to 75, 80, 90 years old have enjoyed these books, and that was my intention all along. They are completely safe for all ages, and I hope that they're enjoyable for all ages, and so far it sounds like they have been. So go to Amazon.com and look for EMBARK, Jon, Jon Justice, and pick yourself up a copy. I'll be back again next week. Be safe. Wash your hands. Wear a mask if you feel like it. Stay away from this crud. I hope that you and your family stay healthy. And again, I'll be back again next week. Bye.
My Nerd World.